Imagine a kingdom so big it covered a quarter of the whole world. A kingdom that ruled over nearly a quarter of all the people on Earth. It was so vast that somewhere at any time of day or night, the sun was shining on one of its lands. People called it the empire on which the sun never sets. This wasn't a story from a fantasy book. This was the British Empire. It began over 400 years ago with brave sailors on tiny wooden ships. They crossed dangerous oceans looking for new lands and new friends. Our story begins way back in the late 1500s. England was a small nation with big ambitions. It had a powerful navy, but it was not yet a world power. That title belonged to Spain. The Spanish had huge ships called galleons, filled with gold and silver from their colonies in America. The English sailors, often called sea dogs, looked at this with envy. Queen Elizabeth I gave them her secret blessing to go out and challenge the Spanish. In 1583, a brave man named Sir Humphrey Gilbert sailed to North America. He claimed a piece of land called Newfoundland for England. This is often seen as the official start of the British Empire. As the 1600s began, the English started to get the hang of this colony-building business. In 1607, they established Jamestown in Virginia. This was their first permanent settlement in America, and it was a real struggle. The settlers faced hunger and fought with the local Powhatan people, but they found something that would make the colony rich tobacco. To grow all this tobacco, the colonists needed lots of workers. This led to a dark and terrible chapter in the empire's story: the transatlantic slave trade. At the same time, on the other side of the world, another part of the empire was taking shape. In 1600, a group of English merchants formed the East India Company. Let's jump forward to the 1700s. The East India Company was no longer just a group of traders in India. It had become something much more powerful. A key moment came in 1757 at the Battle of Plassey, where a company official named Robert Clive led a small army to a stunning victory. This victory changed everything. India became known as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire because it was so incredibly valuable. It supplied Britain with tea, cotton, spices, and diamonds. In 1857, a massive rebellion broke out. Indian soldiers, the sepoys, rose up against their British officers. The uprising, known as the Indian Mutiny, or the First War of Independence, spread across northern India. Back in Britain, something amazing was happening that would supercharge the empire. It was the Industrial Revolution. Starting in the late 1700s, new inventions changed the country from a land of farms into a land of factories. James Watt perfected the steam engine, which could power huge machines. Suddenly, Britain could produce things faster and cheaper than anywhere else in the world. This was the Victorian Age, named after Queen Victoria, who reigned from 1837 to 1901. It was a time of great confidence, power, and expansion. The Royal Navy, the most powerful navy in the world, patrolled the sea lanes, protecting trade and enforcing British power. It seemed like the British Empire was an unstoppable force, a permanent feature of the world. Life within this giant empire was very different depending on who you were and where you lived. For a wealthy family in London or Edinburgh, the empire brought cheap tea for their breakfast table and cotton for their clothes. But for the people who were ruled by the British, life was often very different. In many colonies, local farmers were forced to grow cash crops like cotton or rubber instead of food for their families. Resistance to British rule was a constant feature of the empire. In Africa, leaders like Cetshwayo of the Zulu kingdom fought bravely against British armies. In Ireland, there was a long and bitter struggle for independence. The empire was a massive movement of people, ideas, and cultures, creating a complex web of connections that still exists today. But these connections were often built on a foundation of inequality and power. Even before its peak, the empire had shown that it could shrink as well as grow. The first major blow came in the late 1700s. The 13 colonies in North America had grown prosperous and confident. The next great challenge came in the early 20th century with the two world wars. In World War I, millions of soldiers from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, and Africa fought and died for Britain. World War II left Britain exhausted and nearly bankrupt. It simply didn't have the money or the will to maintain a vast global empire anymore. The war had also shattered the myth of European superiority. After the war, the call for independence grew louder and louder. In India, leaders like Mahatma Gandhi had been leading a powerful, non-violent movement for freedom for decades. The process of decolonization, or the empire breaking up, happened very quickly. It was like a dam bursting. The independence of India in 1947 showed that it was possible. In Africa, charismatic leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya led their people to freedom. Ghana became the first British colony in sub-Saharan Africa to gain independence in 1957. This long goodbye was sometimes peaceful, but often it was not. In some places, like Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising, or in Malaya, there was violent conflict as Britain tried to hold on or to manage the transition of power. The final act in the story of the British Empire came in 1997. On a rainy night in Hong Kong, the British flag was lowered for the last time, and the territory was handed back to China. Today, the British Empire is a thing of the past. You can only read about it in history books. But its ghost is all around us. The world we live in has been profoundly shaped by it. The spread of the English language, now a global language of business, science, and the internet, is perhaps the most obvious legacy. Britain today is a multicultural society, partly because many people from former colonies came to live and work here after World War II. However, we cannot forget the difficult and painful legacies. The history of the empire is filled with conflict, exploitation, and racism. The memory of empire is very different for the British than it is for those who were colonized. Understanding this epic tale, with all its triumphs and its tragedies, is essential for understanding the connections, the cultures, the conflicts, and the world we all share today. The empire is gone, but its echoes are still with us.